So, good morning, everybody. Today is second lecture in the quantitative big imaging, and I'm going to talk about data sets and closing the door. So, data sets is what you usually have yourself, but in this case, it's not about your data, but where is my mouse now? Ah, there it is. Good. So, it's not about your data, but more about data you can use for your purpose. So there is a list of different famous data sets that are used a lot in mainly in machine learning applications. These are different types, can be with different purposes. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what makes a data set a good data set. Could also be about your data set in general. And then how you can build your own data set. And if you don't have enough data, what you can do. And for that, we have different tools and possibly also even use simulations. And here we also have, in the case when you don't have sufficient data, you can actually modify and create variations of your data, and that's called augmentation. And finally, there will also be a part about baselines. So if you want to develop some kind of analysis, it's good to have something to compare with. Doesn't have to be good, but that is also what I'm going to talk about later. And as before, this is a notebook, so we need to load some things. And in particular, in this lecture, the one that may be tricky on some computers, in particular on Macs, is the TensorFlow package. That has been a bit tricky, so during the exercises, if you didn't manage to install it, I can show you how. So that would be these parts here, TensorFlow Keras, TensorFlow datasets. These need to be installed in a little bit different way. Doing that, you will have the full power of the machine. Then there are some references again, and there are some ideas about how to do the building of your data sets, and some other references. And actually this one is a little article which can also be interesting because it's actually approaches the problem when you don't have any data to work with. And yeah, some more. And these are actually tools that you can use. There are some open source tools for augmentation, and of course also some commercial tools, but right now these are the open source. And yeah, they can be helpful to use unless you go it the code way. And today's lecture is actually about other people's data. And you may ask, I got my own data, so why use someone else's? And as I said a little bit before, is you may not have the amount of data really needed in your experiment. Experiment data is expensive, so maybe you can actually use and boost your analysis by using someone else. And the other thing is, when you use someone else's data, you should choose a package of data which is already well prepared. That means you have on one side the images themselves, and on the other side also the answer to the question. So it could be that it's already labeled in some sense. Could be that each image is categorized, or it could even be that in the image someone did actually draw information on these are the interesting regions. So there are some quotes from Twitter/X, and some of these, say, well-known people within the field of data science says, for example, this, John Taylor, he says that it's fantastic with all the algorithms, but in the end, he did most, gained most from a few good data sets than all the fancy algorithms, and that's telling a little bit of the importance of the data. And another one is director of AI at Tesla, and he said on a slide here, amount of lost sleep over different things, and for the PhD and working with Tesla, and for the PhD is the red bar or red slice here is the data set that people sleep badly over, and the rest is how to do your models. At Tesla, the way they are working, they actually have almost reversed the whole case. So they spend a lot of time in getting the data right and then finally doing some models and algorithms. It's also showing the importance and shift in data-driven image analysis. Today's lecture is mainly talking about the machine learning data-driven approach, but a lot of these data sets can be equally useful for, say, traditional image analysis. You always need some test data where you can test your algorithms against. But in machine learning, it's really important because that's the thing that drives the analysis. And then we have Cathy Scott, and in the end, she writes a lot of things, and in the end, she comes up to 95% of her time is about handling the data, and in the end, doing some machine learning, letting the algorithms run, maybe even build new algorithms. But again, she says making the data in a good quality is actually what takes time. And well, it has been talked about, data is the new oil. That is the big trading material, and in some senses it is, and it's a very important part. And there is this article, if you click on the link, talking about the importance of the data. And you always need the data to test an algorithm with what you know, and otherwise you don't know if the algorithm really did what you wanted. You can, of course, do it manually, run it once, look at one image. Okay, good, bad, but that is not very efficient when you start working with thousands of images. Again, you can't click through 1,000 images and saying this is good or bad. And with having the data set, you always have the ground truth, and can then test and make sure that everything is in right order. Then with the big companies, they actually evolve their algorithms all the time, and with that, they also again need to test data to make sure that the algorithms are doing the right thing. And for machine learning, as I already said, you need good data. So if you, for example, want to count cells, you could possibly write your own algorithm. But if you want to see small changes in the cell structure, it's starting to get a bit tricky. You can still go for the writing own algorithm. And always, when it's about subtle changes in noise, it's getting harder and harder to write flexible algorithms that can handle it. And with a simple algorithm, you have a small set of rules, but the more complicated the data is, for example, in tissue, there are so many variations that it's not very easy to make a set of rules that actually covers all the cases. And in that case, it may be better to use the data-driven approach. And important is that you should keep in mind that data ideally should be reusable. And if you can structure your data in a way and also label it, document it, in a good way, then you could also maybe use it for another application, which is beneficial because then someone else or you could use the same data for a second task, and that's pretty much optimizing your workflow. And in the beginning, your algorithms by nature are quite messy. You're experimenting, you're trying things, can sometimes be complicated and also poorly written, because when you develop in the first time, you do it under time pressure. And the prototype looks correspondingly, unless you have a very structured approach from the beginning. And if you then at least have safe data or good data, then at least you know that is a safe point. And then you can work on from that. And yeah, the recycling saves you time because you know already what you have to do. Then there are some famous data sets. I would say every time you come across machine learning in some sense, you will come across these data sets, or at least the first two. So MNIST digits, I will show them soon. And the ImageNet data, they are kind of standards that people start benchmarking their algorithms on. BRATS is a medical data set that I also will show. And these are also good in the sense that if you start out with these, that is what people actually are working with, and then you can benchmark against other people's work as well, which is pretty good. So the MNIST dataset is a collection of digits, 0 to 9, handwritten by, honestly, I don't know how many people, and they're well prepared, so they're black and white, and also, I think they are complete black and white. Possibly there is a little gradient at the edges. But they are very clean images. How clean people were writing is another question, but that's the challenge in this data set. So this is one of the first go-to data sets when you start building some kind of neural network for detecting numbers, or just to train getting up the workflow. Then we have ImageNet, is a well-categorized data set, and it's categorized first into different kinds of objects or living matter, and then it goes down in this tree-shaped structure. So you can, for example, say that you want to look at plants, and then you can see for flowering plants and different flowers, and then plant parts, fruit, apples, tomatoes, for example. Maybe actually for that one could be a crossover between the branches, but that's because there are double categorizations on it. And there are very many images, so they're talking about 1,000 categories and more than 1 million images. So the level of detail is not just dog and cat, that's also classic decision criteria in first machine learning tasks. Either it's food or it's dogs and cats. But this one is even detailed to the level of whether it's a wolf or German Shepherd dog. So it's really going fine-grained. This plot here tells about how accurate actually the level of mistakes different machine learning algorithms did in the development over time. And I think this is early, so like 2010 up to 2015. Yeah, it is. So it's over 5 years, the improvement in algorithms increased a lot, and that also with the structure of these algorithms. And that came, of course, with the development of available hardware. And in the beginning, people didn't use the graphic cards for doing machine learning, and then at some point they did, and that made it possible to do much more complex algorithms. Another data set is the BRADS, which is tumors in brain images, and then there is a lot of brain scans, and they have marked up tumors and damaged tissue in these images, and that can also be used for medical analysis, development of medical analysis algorithms. And what we have is we have different approaches how to work with the data. In the beginning, it was in image analysis, you needed really experts to tell this is something special, and you need their feedback. And then you need a lot of domain experts. For example, you need a handwriting expert for graphology, graph topology, and computer vision to see the images in ImageNet, biomedical engineer for seeing tumors in tissue, and so on. With the machine learning approach, it kind of got, and with the available data sets, you could even have teenage boys sitting in their basement with a gaming computer, taking a data set, playing around with these algorithms, and come up with pretty decent results. So it's kind of a shortcut, but it's also dangerous to trust these algorithms completely. So I would still recommend, because at some point you need to have someone who labels up the data. You can't. The people on this side, they don't know what the data means. They just know that they have some input and some output, and that's the only thing they know. So I think machine learning cannot live without these people, because they know the real stuff. But you can win competitions with almost no knowledge in the domain. And an interesting aspect of it, I said you can recycle data, is working with inherited data. And often, there are some quotes in this paper. She thought it's like using inherited data set is using someone else's toothbrush, and it's kind of an act of desperation. So even though you can recycle, it's a good starting point, but you better have your own data and build it up in a good way. Problem is the collection of data is on one side expensive. It's maybe that you don't get time on the instrument that produces the data, and with that you may need to take this kind of desperate action to use someone else's. Inherited data is of course easier to use. It's already prepared, but you need to trust it. And if you don't trust it, then of course you can't really use it. With sharing data, there is the FAIR principle, and that's something, at least in Europe, is I think it's even coming from EU, that people publicly funded data should be shared at some point. And the FAIR principle is about having the data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Findable, we have the DOIs, so people can actually put DOIs on the data sets, which makes them possible to find. Accessible is if there is a database somewhere around where you can just fetch them. So the DOI should actually point to the place where you can fetch them. Interoperable is maybe a bit strange term. It's about using formats and provide tools to make these data sets available. And well, it's easy if you use TIFF images, but if you may have produced your own data format for some reason, then you need to provide also the way to read the data. Otherwise, people cannot use it. And reusable means that you also need to document what's done in with the data and the origin of it. So these are all parts are well defined in this paper by Wilkinson. And there are efforts, for example, within the large-scale facility community called PANOSC. And that's an open science cloud. And I think, meanwhile, all the large-scale facilities in Europe, at least, they are within this framework. So, for example, PSI, you can go to a database point, and then you can fetch the open data. The plan at PSI is, for example, that all data should be available within, I think there is time period of 3 years, up to 5 years, where the data is protected, and then after that it should be open. So this protection time is to make sure that you can do your PhD and not someone is not taking your data and making your science of your efforts before you can publish it yourself. So that is the open data concept, and there's a lot of work going on in this field on the politics level, technical level, and I think the systems are maturing right now. But to make data from these facilities available, it's really important to describe what the data actually is about. Because if you get, say, a bunch of spectra from some reflectometer without describing what the sample was, the measurement conditions, it's useless. So it requires a lot of metadata describing everything around the data. Then there are other data sets. So there is a lot of challenges. So that's kind of playground, you could say. In Kaggle and Grand Challenge, they are challenges or competitions where someone puts up a task and ask people to solve it and give the best solution in precision, speed, etc. There is also Google Dataset Search. So, yeah, well, you have the link here, but I think it's just dataset.google.com. And there is also a Wikipedia list of different datasets that you can access. So there are many opportunities to find datasets that would fit your purpose. And now I'm talking about good datasets and everything. What is actually a good dataset? And the categorization is to have a good dataset, you need a large amount. Often you need to get the statistical variations within the observed object. You also need the full diversity. So even though there is something that is very small and underrepresented, you need to have those items too. And you also need the annotations. So that means you need lots of images, of course. You can, of course, work with small datasets. Sometimes you have to, but usually, in particular in machine learning, it is the bigger datasets you have, the better. And the size of the dataset is depending on how complicated your problem is. If you just have the case of, say, again, dogs and cats, it's probably not so hard and you don't need that many images. But if you're looking at very subtle differences or nested relations in the data, then you need larger and larger data sets to make sure that you have the right thing. I also touched the problem on class imbalance. That is when most of the cases, they are okay, and you want to detect an anomaly which is very small. You may have 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, but you need still to cover it, and that is what you also need to handle within a good data set. So diversity, there is a lot of data. Differences, you can have the origin, how the data is generated, different scanners, modalities. reconstruction algorithms that used, different noise levels, illumination types, if samples are rotated in different ways, could even be color changes if you use color images, and also many examples from each category. So, for example, if you have one male breast cancer, it's really hard to generalize anything out of it. And it exists, but it's very rare. So it's hard to find a good generalization out of that. Meaningful labels should be a clear label according to a clear task or question, and it should also not be ambiguous. So shouldn't be that each an object has two answers, but you really want to have very well-defined answer for each image. Could also be should be non-obvious, because if you just look at the histogram, it's quite and saying that the image is bright, it's quite obvious that it is bright. So that is not needed. That can be that can be derived easily from the algorithm. And it should be possible to derive it from the image itself. So, for example, if you're looking at an X-ray, you can't tell what health insurance that person had. So that is kind of useless. And of course, it should be possible to quantify the information in it. Then the purpose of a data set is also very varying. So you have 4 main purposes here listed, but there could also be other things. But the main 4 categories are classification. You want to say that this image is a dog and that image is a cat. Can do regression. So for example, that's actually the example of the digits. You could do it as a classification. You can classify that this image is a 1, this image is a 2, and so on. But you could also do it as a regression, and then you have a scalar, and then you have to round a little bit around it. But the scalar should give you a number that is closer to 1 for 1, closer to 2 for 2, and so on. Segmentation is often confused with classification, but then you look at the image and telling what is the content of the image. So the different items on the image. So you can say that here is a dog, here is a cat. And detection is finding something specific. It's in a way related to the classification too. Detecting some, say, a tumor or something like that. Just saying that it's there or about in this region. So, yeah, now I talked a lot about what the slides actually say. Yeah, so here you have a bunch of pictures, and the task of the classification is to put them into 2 bins. And the categories doesn't have to have a specific order, it's just that you have the categories. And each image can only have 1 single category. So that is what you can have from the classification. Here's an example. Actually, yeah, you can look at it. Just run this code. So what I'm doing here is you load from TensorFlow datasets the MNIST dataset, and then it's split into the training data and with info means that we get information, first the image, and then we get the information that this is a 4. This pink thing here is still some development thing for. No, it's a big data set. Okay, it's a very big data set, so it says that I can't take it in the memory. So not so bad error actually. And regression. Here we have a classic one that's often common in regression is from the picture of a house, possibly with some additional information, it should estimate what would be the value of this house. Could also be the risk of a hurricane by observing a satellite image. And the idea is that it produces one or even more decimal values, giving a scale of something. And another regression example, it's a Kaggle exercise, is from a collection of radiographs from children's hands. You should determine the age of the child. And here you can see different sizes. So this is 100 months. That's quite old, actually. 186, so they are getting more almost adult. 30 months, there is one that is pretty young. No, it wasn't, not in this collection. Okay, but anyway, from the shape of the hand, the dimensions, the regression should be able to tell how old the child is. And so the training needs to take care of that. Segmentation is, again, as I said, it's a pixel-wise task. So it's actually going pixel by pixel, determining where you have different things. So again, I have the dogs and cats example, where you can tell where the cats are and where the dogs are. So that would be a segmentation task. Could also be finding or locating a tumor in the lung, or streets from satellite images. Yeah, so those are some, and I see I have a typo, but yeah, okay, that can be fixed. Usually you just have a few objects in this case when you do this, but yeah, you could also take, for example, a microscope image of cells, and identifying different types of cells could also be a case. Yeah, which comes here. In this case, you have this microscope image, and unfortunately it's a bit dark, but you can see maybe that there is some coloring here. Coloring in this case is that it has been taken one step further, so it's not only segmented but also labeled. So you have labeling comes in a later lecture actually, but the idea is that each item gets an ID number or a name or whatever. So you can identify each individual found object. Detection is a prediction of what type you have in the image. Mostly it's about bringing in a bounding box, and even if you have multiple images, the classic example is detection of cars or humans in a picture. In this case, you have some opaque regions in the lungs, and they are identified, but it's just saying within this box you have something which is not good. So it's more a coarse tool, but sometimes it's sufficient just to identify that it is there. And well, a lot of other tasks, and there's a little bit of reading. I think that one lost the link. And another task you can also go into with this data set is looking into denoising. So if you have image noise, something I'm going to talk about next lecture, there is also, it's good to test how good your algorithms are with the help of some data set. You can also use data sets for testing super resolution. In principle, what you do is you have a large image, downsample it with some way, and then you try to reconstruct again what is the true thing, the high resolution image. And to build your own data set, you have seen now that there are many purposes. There are also requirements on how it's labeled and so on. So building your own data set is very time consuming. First you need to measure, then you have to actually do a lot of work on the data itself. And the number of tools, especially if you have a specific task, there are not so many available, or very basic tools. And of course, it will be problem specific because it's about your thing. So That can be good. And there are different ways of preparing the data. And to start with, you can do the code-free approach. So you just categorize images and put them in different folders. That's the easy one. You could also create an Excel file where you have the file name and different categories in columns. And for segmentation and object detection, can take some drawing tool, very simple. In this case, suggesting Fiji. And just draw in the images and saying everything that is red is is the category I want to look at. And then you can save this markup in some extra image that you save together with the data. Then there are some software for data labeling, a lot of free tools. And well, you can just follow these links to see the different tools that are available. And of course, there are also the commercial approaches, which you can go and download. Some of them are in a subscription form that you have to subscribe on these services, and other ones, they are just buy it once and use it. So one example is this annotation of spots. With today's light, it's not so visible, but in neutron imaging, it's very common that you get these very bright spots all over the images. That's part of the detection and interaction with the samples that produce these spots. They're randomly distributed, random shape. And what I did was to mark up all the spots in 2K by 2K image. And then I got a mask of this kind. So that I just did with some bitmap drawing application and a drawing tablet. Could also even use the iPad or something and draw and mark up all these. But this is very time consuming. I really wanted this for the lecture purpose, so I spent 8 hours on sitting there marking up. It was not a fun Sunday afternoon. But anyway, I marked it up, and now I have a data set that we can use for testing in the lectures. Then another approach is to run simulations, and there are some nice examples doing this. And the simulation could be based on, of course, geometric models, so you just have boxes and dots or something. Could also have template models that you have maybe some given template shapes that some variation, and then you spread it out over the image. And you can also go for physical models to generate the data. So you can have maybe first some kind of geometric shape, and then with that you push it through a physical model to produce the data that you would expect from the imaging system. And this is easy to play with, because then by changing some parameters, you can get a new data set. Then you also plug in a random generator, and you can produce as many images as you like. But the important here is that the model spot must be true to what you actually want to measure. And there are some nice examples. And this one, actually, meanwhile, it turned into a full paper. But in this case, they had some material testing. It was metal casts. And they want to see how the pores were distributed. So what they did was actually to produce some kind, I'm not sure now, but I think they actually took a CT of, and that is segmented already, and then they messed it up afterwards with different transfer functions, different noise levels, different distortions, and then they ran it back again and tried to detect the ground truth again. So this is a very nice example on how you can work with the physical simulation. And then there are some other examples also, how to play with different data sets. Problems with the data sets. already touched it a little bit. We have the class imbalance. You have too few samples, maybe not homogeneous distribution. And of course, there are other problems with the data. And that can lead to other problems when you try to build an algorithm. You may be biased towards something if you don't have the full representation of the data. One bias is I don't know if this is real or if it's just someone who made it up, but anyway, Google did a little mistake by classifying these images. It did right on most of the things, but this one turned into gorillas, which wasn't very appreciated. And Google's quick solution, they got the shitstorm for it, according to this story, was that they just took out the gorilla category from the learning, and then it was fine. Then it found that it was humans. So I don't know if this is a true story, but yeah, it shows at least on the problem. The better solution to avoid biasing, and that's actually available for all kind of machine learning and AI, is we need to expose it to a lot of data, a lot of variations. And for example, here are some sample images. Here, for example, people with glasses, wearing a hat with bangs, wavy hair, and so on. So you need really to categorize each image into different categories and with large variations. And it can also be messy combinations like this one. You have one without any decorations, one with hat, one with glasses. That can make it even harder for the algorithms to find the right thing. So there is this IBM diverse face data set, which covers a lot of variations, and that's, I think, is open available. And looking at some examples, we can run this one. We can see in this example, I extracted just a subset from MNIST, and the subset was the numbers 1 to 3. And you can see here that there is some distribution. You have 1s, 2s, and 3s. If I can go up somehow, let's hope. Hey, come on. No, it doesn't work. It's a bit annoying, yeah. Okay, but anyway, you can see that there are different numbers of each digit, and that is what we are going to work with in a later example. Limited data can be a problem, but doesn't have to be a problem. So if you have few data points, it's of course not so good variations, but really bad could be that you have unbalanced data. In this case, it's not a problem because you have the majority is clearly separated from the minority. But if you have an overlap between majority and minority, it's very hard to detect it. And with that, you need to spend more time in making sure that you really can detect this anomaly. Then, of course, you have little or missing training data. Could be incomplete in different ways. That's also a problem. If it's missing labels, you can of course sit down and produce more labels. But if you don't cover some special case, that could be bad. And in order to handle this, you can work with something called augmentation. And I think I talk about that after the break. So let's stop here now.